What if India was partitioned differently? In our own timeline, India was under the control of the British East India Company until 1857 when the Sepoy Mutiny broke out. It got crushed, but the United Kingdom chose to make India a crown colony and made Queen Victoria its empress. After the Second World War, India would gain independence, but would be split into a majority Hindu and a majority Muslim state, which are India and Pakistan. However, Jammu and Kashmir chose independence, which would lead to years of fighting. In 1971, Bangladesh declared independence from Pakistan, and in 1975 Sikkim joined India. The division of India is up to this day the case. But what if that didn't happen? What if India was partitioned differently? I split this video into 4 timelines with different partitions. In this timeline, rather than dividing India into a majority Muslim and a majority Hindu state, it is instead divided by linguistic groups. In the north, a majority Indo-Aryan country would be formed, while in the south a majority Dravidian state would be formed. The majority Indo-Aryan state would become India, and the majority Dravidian state would become Dravidia. Maybe we can also imagine some other linguistic divisions. The provinces of Afghania and Balochistan are Indo-Iranian and so are transferred to Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the north of India, northern Nepal, and Bhutan would be given to Tibet, while the east goes to Burma. It is also possible that Dravidia gets northern Sri Lanka, which speaks Tamil. In this timeline, no war would break out between India and Dravidia, as there is no state to fight over. In 1949, the People's Republic of China still wins the Chinese Civil War, and then in 1951 invades Tibet. India would probably be faced with religious tension, as 39% of its population are Muslim, with the other 55% being Hindu and the other 6% adhering to different religions like Christianity or Sikhism. Meanwhile, Dravidia is almost fully Hindu. Dravidia would most likely be unfriendly to Sri Lanka as it contains the north of the island. India would probably seek protection from India, which may strain Indo-Dravidian relations. I doubt that Dravidia would end up like Pakistan, with which I mean a repressive military dictatorship that would attack non-Dravidians, or development of nukes. As for India, it may or may not develop nukes, but in this timeline wouldn't be as hostile to China like in our own timeline. The Sino-Indian War of 1962 never happens, as China already controls Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh, but relations may be somewhat strained by the fact that the Dalai Lama lives in India. For Burma, its fate wouldn't be any different, maybe even more violent thanks to more ethnicities. The Soviet intervention in Afghanistan would still happen, but in this timeline, Afghanistan has a coastline and thus could be supported by the United States directly, rather than through Pakistan. And thus, after the Soviet withdrawal, the Taliban wouldn't be able to take over Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda wouldn't be in Afghanistan, but somewhere else. Let's just say Saudi Arabia, and thus the war on terror would be focused on Saudi Arabia. The Saudis, who were up to this point dependent on the US, stood no chance and got destroyed. Saudi Arabia would be dissolved and replaced with the Republic of Najd, while the Hashemites ruling over Jordan were given Hejaz back. The United States would have essentially full control of Najd's oil fields, and it is just a puppet regime. This causes OPEC to become much weaker and the West to have more oil, which is crucial in 2022 and 2023. India would be without a rivalry with Pakistan, and China much stronger, and without Pakistan and Bangladesh existing, India could successfully build pipelines from Burma and Central Asia. And without Pakistan supporting them, the Naxalites aren't nearly as powerful as in our own timeline. In this timeline, India is overall stronger, but religiously divided, and the Dravidian South is independent. In this second timeline, India isn't just split along languages groups, but by languages themselves. A lot of states would be formed, but the strongest ones would be Bengal, Punjab and Hindustan, but even they are nothing like a dominant force on the subcontinent, and other countries would also seek to expand their sphere of influence. Afghania would not last long, as it would probably either forcefully or peacefully join Afghanistan. Afghanistan may also expand into Balochistan to either take the ethnic Pashto lands in the north, or even the whole nation. In 1951, China still invades Tibet, and the Dalai Lama flees to Hindustan, straining relations. In 1962, China sends an ultimatum to Ladakh to hand over Xichin, and they comply. That same year, China invades Arunachal Pradesh and annexes most of the country while the rest is given to Assam in good faith. China would expand its sphere of influence into the smaller states of the northeast and may sponsor communist parties there. Communism would also see success in the southern states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Meanwhile, Portugal would still hold on to Goa as there is no strong enough force to kick the Portuguese out. When the Tamil Tigers rose up in Sri Lanka, the Tamil Socialist Republic declared war on Sri Lanka and took the ethnic Tamil lands, and puppeted Sri Lanka. Fearing communism, Balochistan, Punjab, Sindh, Kashmir, Lake, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, and Odisha form a military alliance with Hindustan. Just like in the other timeline, the Soviets invade Afghanistan, but the US are unable to fund the Mujahideen as Balochistan is neutral and Iran is unfriendly to the US, and thus Afghanistan falls to the communists. Then when the Soviet Union collapses, Afghanistan would fall to anarchy with many different factions fighting each other. Just like last time, the Taliban is somewhere else, maybe Saudi Arabia, and the US invades Saudi Arabia. Like last time, the Saudis stand no chance, and are transformed into the Republic of Najd, while Jordan gets Hejaz and so the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The war could be followed by Islamist extremism as Western powers controlled the holy cities, but with their withdrawal things cool down. Meanwhile, without the Saudis, terrorist organizations wouldn't have Saudi backing. This also causes the West to have their oil, which can help to make oil cheaper, which is especially vital in 2022 and 2023. Meanwhile, OPEC would be much weaker. The other Gulf states may unite into the United Arab Emirates, consisting of the old United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. The Yemeni civil war meanwhile would be won by the Houthis, but at least it would be over. India in this timeline would be much weaker and smaller. It is not even close to becoming the most populated country in the world, as it just has a population of 609 million. In terms of economy, its GDP would be with $872.5 billion, the 20th in the world, just barely ahead of Switzerland but behind Turkey. Meanwhile, China would have a huge deal of influence in southern and eastern India. In this third timeline, the Chaudhry Rahmat Ali proposal was followed and a super Pakistan is established. It contains all of Kashmir, all of Punjab, Gujarat, Hyderabad, Calcutta, Northern Ceylon, Hyderabad, Shrivastai, Bihar, all of Bengal and Assam. A war between India and Pakistan would break out just shortly thereafter, but the war would go badly for India. Forces in Banjistan managed to connect with Bihar and Shrivastai, while in the south forces in Osmanistan and Gujarat managed to connect. In the north, India would get slowly pushed out of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh. By 1949, India is all but defeated and has to unconditionally surrender to Pakistan. Pakistan expands even further, including into enclaves, or to connect enclaves. Pakistan changes its name to India. The rest of India is split into Madras and Hindustan. Both of them are Indian vassals. India would then expand into its neighboring states like Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan. They may also fall after Afghanistan. In 1951, China still invades Tibet, but the Dalai Lama is rejected asylum in India and has to go somewhere else, maybe the United States. In 1962, the Sino-Indian War would break out, and without India spending decades fighting itself, it is able to resist the Chinese invasion, and a ceasefire is signed with no territorial changes on both sides. India would forcefully convert its population and citizens of its vassals to Islam, essentially eradicating Jainism, Sikhism, and most importantly Hinduism, and after that was completed, these states would eventually get integrated into India itself. India would, together with the United States, support the Mujahideen against the Soviets, and with Indian help the Taliban takes over Afghanistan, and after 9/11 the United States invades Afghanistan only for the Taliban to come out on top. India would be a powerhouse as it contains all of South Asia and never saw much fighting other than that one war in the 40s. It would probably try to extend its sphere of influence, for example, into Central Asia or other parts of the Muslim world. Internationally, despite of funding the Taliban, India is a close U.S. ally as it is hostile to China, which has territorial claims on them, and as the self-proclaimed defender of Islam, it'd be a bad look to support a regime that targets its Muslim population. The Islamic Republic of India would be the second biggest economy in the world, surpassing Germany and Japan BJT behind its rival China, and in terms of population it surpassed China a long time ago, and is now close to 2 billion people. This also causes Islam to grow by over 1 billion, meaning Islam is now the biggest religion in the world while Hinduism doesn't exist anymore. In this last timeline, India was simply not divided and remains as one unfeed country. For the sake of simplicity, we can assume that this country would follow the same path as India in our own timeline. The country would at first probably be plagued with Islamic insurgencies and terror attacks, but given that the India of our own timeline and of this timeline are tolerant to religious groups, the Muslim protests would slowly fade away, and a strong united Hindu-Muslim country shines. In 1951, China still invades Tibet, and the Dalai Lama flees to India. Without years of fighting over Kashmir and holding Pakistan, India is stronger and is able to resist the Chinese invasion in 1962 and retains Chin. In 1979, the Soviet Union still invades Afghanistan, and with India being non-aligned, they don't let the US send help to the Mujahideen, who then fall. When the Soviet Union collapses, Afghanistan would too, and India would sponsor a friendly and democratic regime to take over. With that, the Taliban would be in Saudi Arabia, and thus the war on terror hits them instead, and like with the first two examples, the Americans establish the Republic of Najdi, while Jordan gets Hejaz. Without Pakistan and Bangladesh in their way, India would be able to construct pipelines from Burma and Central Asia, just further increasing their strength, and they probably have a sphere of influence around them like in Southeast Asia. In this timeline, India is a superpower as it has a population of 1.8 million and a GDP of $4.8 trillion, making it the third biggest economy in the world. In these timelines, either India is bigger, Pakistan is bigger, India is balkanized, or we have a Dravidian state, and the outcome for the world depends on who wins, but for the most part our world is like in our own timeline, except mostly for India itself, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.